Good day, everybody. My name is Brad Eisen. I will be your tutorial presenter for this presentation, which is going to be a part of a larger series because this topic is complex. I'm doing it over a series of tutorials because this takes a long time, and no emergency manager is expected to move through the disaster recovery preparedness cycle in one flail swoop. If you've got the team and resources to do that, it's still going to take a long time, especially if you're starting from scratch or haven't been through any type of disaster recovery before. We're going to talk about some very basic things and first steps that you can take to get this going. But I want to start off with making sure that we define the types of recovery, because there are basically three. There we go. Long term. Okay, so we split it out into these chunks because no recovery is the same, no community is the same, no disaster is the same. And you've got to be ready for the things that go on in each of these, because there's different steps, there's different engagement levels, there's different funding, there's just a lot of differences. Where I want to start with is short. So this is usually the days to weeks kind of time frame. Days to weeks. This might be considered kind of like re-entry. So if you've evacuated a community and you're lucky enough to not have any buildings destroyed or homes destroyed, and people and staff can get back into community quite quickly after the evacuation has been called off, we would consider that a short-term recovery because it could take days to weeks. Medium term, or you might hear it as intermediate, is going to be to months, where you're looking at least 1+ months. This is where you might have some restoration. Maybe you're not able to access some of the staff buildings due to contamination. Maybe if it's a flood or a landslide or whatever it is, there could be access issues to having the community returned back to the way that it's supposed to operate day to day. Long term, you are looking for, I would probably go 6 months to 5, 6, 7, 8 years. So 3 very different planning scenarios. Lots of commonalities between the 3 that as you're planning things out and getting things ready, they will be considered into each one. But you've got to really think about which one you want to be focused on. And I kind of just go right to the long term because that's the worst case scenario. If you're getting into a long-term disaster recovery where you're going to have members and staff or other resources out of the community longer than 3 months and into a year, and you have to do rebuilding of infrastructure, buildings, long-term mental health issues, even animal welfare issues that are long-term, you've got to start your planning now, because you do not want to be doing this during the response. You don't even want to be doing this a week or 2 into the response. You don't even want to be doing this as a recovery team who is separate from the response team or the emergency coordination center team, doing this off to the side in the response. You want to be doing this now. So short, medium, long term, I've got graphics and slides that will accompany all of this. So it'll help you frame and picture some of these things. But regardless of the length of time here, you're going to have a lot of the same criteria that will be used to determine when you can re-enter a community. So things like access to water, health services, those critical functions in the community, law enforcement, power, communications. These are the critical pieces of infrastructure that are going to dictate your re-entry into the community. So if you don't have stable health services, if you don't have power, water, there has to be a decision made about when do you allow people to return and for what length of time if some of these things are missing. But I'm not going to get too far into that, because before we get too far into planning and criteria, recovery governance is going to be a main topic for this video. So I'm going to put that over here in red, because this is the piece you do not want to sort out during a response. It's too chaotic. There's too much emotion. There's too much stress. Again, especially if your community has not been through a big emergency or a disaster, governance is the last thing you want to be sorting out when you have elected officials like chief and council and other managers and directors all sort of in the chaos. You do not want to be sorting out who's going to be doing what in terms of the recovery. So governance is your first step into determining how you're even going to move forward with recovery planning. Now, really depends on how your community is set up. This scenario, we're going to go with the assumption that, of course, you probably have a chief and council. That should be like that. Probably have some sort of band or tribal admin, manager, CEO, director, whatever it's called in your community. You've probably got department managers. Hopefully you have an emergency management coordinator. Or maybe one of these departments is the emergency manager. It has it in their portfolio. Hopefully you have a counselor who is responsible for the EM portfolio. If you do not have any of these things, you've got to start with putting someone as the lead for recovery planning. Actually, you should have someone in the lead for emergency management in general. But we're going to assume here that at the very basic, you have an EM coordinator or manager. We'll put manager here too. Whatever position it is, you have one full-time person dedicated to emergency management. We're going to assume that. And we're going to assume that this person at least reports into, either the band or tribal manager or CEO or another manager. Because I am sure that if this is you and it's only you and you're your only resource, you're already probably fairly busy, let alone adding to what you do in your day, normal operations, we'll call it. Imagine having to add even a medium-term disaster recovery onto your plate. It's not possible. It's going to lead to burnout, stress, things getting lost. Everything will be chaos. If you are a lone coordinator or manager and you are planning here, the first thing you've got to do is sort out for recovery who is going to lead from the start in the plans section in the Emergency Coordination Center. Even before that, where is this person going to come from? It could be this person flips into this person and you have some ability to augment and put someone into this position if you've got more than a couple people. Whatever it is, however you want to organize your resources and the staff, there has to be a dedicated person for the disaster recovery. No ifs, ands, or buts. Luckily, if you have to hire a temporary contracted person, Indigenous Services Canada through the Emergency Management Assistance Program will cover their full-time temporary salary. But you've got to have someone there. Where does that person report to? In my experience, big disaster recoveries where you're rebuilding dozens of homes, you're getting an influx of 50, 60, 70, 100, 200. I've been part of some recoveries where it's been up to $1 billion. A recent First Nation, $500 million. Very interested in all that money. Everyone's very interested in all of that money. So figuring out who this lead is, who they report to, is critical. And how do they interface with the existing emergency management team? Because when you get through the re-entry and you're into what I would call like full-time recovery, this person, one, needs to be handling the day-to-day emergency management to get ready for the next one. They've got to be back into supporting the post-incident, after-action review, whatever you want to call it, collecting lessons observed from the emergency response team, whoever that is. They've got to be involved in facilitating the collection of learning from what just happened, so that can be incorporated to update plans and training and policies and everything. So very important that they get back to their regular day-to-day job while this person takes over the enormous work here. I would not recommend that the recovery lead report into this person. You could do it if they're experienced enough and already a manager, you could do it. At the very least, this person should report into the CEO or the band manager, with the counselor responsible. You might even have a new counselor take on a recovery portfolio. So maybe the EM counselor stays here, maybe they transfer. Whatever it is, you've got to figure out all these reporting structures, lines of communications, and authority ahead of time. And even with the department managers, because they all own aspects of the recovery. The housing manager, responsible, has a stake in the home rebuilding and restoration process. Public Works manager will have a stake and influence in road repairs, new road construction, whatever it is. Capital Projects manager will have a stake in the recovery from an assets management and capital projects, especially if you're having to bring in temporary contracted heavy equipment operators and equipment. That's got to go, capital projects needs to know. So it's very important about how you add essentially what you're doing as a whole new program or department to your existing organization. That has got to be figured out as part of your recovery preparedness. How that looks for your community is, it's going to take some time to figure out, because if you've not dealt with the recovery, people are not going to understand the length of time it can take in a long term or a medium term. So that you have to be prepared to really make a new department. And you know, how you facilitate that conversation with your leadership. You know, they're going to have a lot of questions about how is this funded? You know, we have set up recovery teams on reserve that have hit 30 staff. How is a payroll for 30 new full-time people going to be covered? Emergency Management Assistance Program. Where are they going to sit? Where are they going to have their offices? Do they all get laptops and new cell phones and new desks? Where is everything going to come from for those 30 new staff? So who else also has to be involved in that? Human resources. You're having to coach and explain to chief and council where all this money is going to come from. You've got to hire. It's going to take a long time. Job descriptions for the positions. That's all going to be done up front. Because again, you don't want to be writing job descriptions for recovery coordinators and community development coordinators and security managers during the response. You don't want to do that. You want to have as much of that done as before. That's part of the preparedness. So, basically what I tell communities is when you're going through this process, you just have to be going through the program design or department stand-up phase. Same as you would. You've got to follow your current nation's HR policy, financial policy, the structures, the IT systems, all of those structures need to be in a position to scale up to adding this new group. You can do that through workshops with all the other managers and the tribal manager and other staff, asking them questions. You know, if we had to hire 30 people over a 1-month period and stand up a whole new department, what would your role be in that? How quickly could you get to it? What would they need in terms of resources? Think about finance, human resources. They all have the ability to hire additional staff under EMAP for the recovery. Maybe you bring in a temporary human resources coordinator just for recovery, finance clerk, or maybe 2 finance clerks. You probably actually need 3 or 4 if it's a $500 million. Bringing those people into the fold. Are those people going to report to finance and HR, or are they going to be part of this team and work as a coordination support? Those are the discussions you've got to have. How are you going to share resources and money? And how are you going to work together so you have a team that is ready to do a holistic community recovery? It's a big, big piece. Lots of resources on how you structure those conversations, speaking notes on how to influence chief and council and help them walk them through. So keep an eye out for those dropping with this post and future series trainings. I'm going to run out of room here, but that's okay. We're going to make it work because I wanted to write big so you all have a picture. Okay, I'm just going to create this kind of like little separation over here and hopefully you can see it. But the other component, while you're educating chief and council and everyone on the recovery and what it is and their roles, if you're getting into long-term, medium-term, partners, because unless you're a community that is totally self-sufficient, you are going to need people to come into the community that can provide cleanup, restoration, engineering, rebuilding, environmental testing. Whatever the impact of the disaster is on the community, whether it's 3 burned down homes or 20 burned down homes or 100 burned down homes and a school or 2 shut down and the band office shut down, you're going to need to bring in outside support in terms of restoration, cleanup, even, again, like I said, helping to hire, helping to do finance. That could be through, highly likely, contracted partners. So whatever resources you have, contracted, there is a high chance, maybe you'll be lucky, but you are going to get some contractors, existing partners that have not gone through an emergency management assistance program funded recovery. Okay. Typically in nations, you have a project, you write a proposal, you go to ISK for funding, you get the funding, they send it to you, you do your reporting, you get some money, you know, you can pay your partners. It's all kind of, that workflow is all sorted out. However, when you're in a recovery, that workflow is totally upended because ISK through EMAP, because it's not a funding agreement, it's EMAP is not recovery, response and recovery funding is not a funding agreement. It's a program that ISK puts out there that nations can access. It works on reimbursement of actual costs. And what that means is you're not going to get funding to pay your contractors until ISK has seen the invoices. Okay? There are circumstances where you can get advances, and we have a video on that. There are circumstances where you can pre-submit a lot of these things to get the funding to pay your contractors. But there's a very high risk that if you're going through a major long-term recovery that is in this, looking like this, if you're looking at like a Lytton First Nation rebuild, Little Red River Cree Nation rebuild, anything like that where there's going to be an influx of hundreds of millions of dollars, and you could have 300 to 400 contracted service providers working in your community, cash flow is going to be really difficult unless your nation has $100 million or $60 million sitting in the bank. And it's okay with spending that money before guarantee of reimbursement from ISK. In the preparedness process, you have to talk to your partners about this. You have to make it clear that what you needed from them during maybe a regular home build or a regular restoration or whatever, it's not going to be the same with EMAP. There's going to be more scrutiny, more paperwork, possibly more delays. So they need to be very educated on the EMAP reimbursement process. And if they want to play ball in the recovery, they may want to consider augmenting their funding cash flow as well, meaning lines of credit, large loan from the bank, because when you engage with ISK on funding, let's say they do approve $100 million for 50 new homes, whatever the number is. They may provide an advance for that. And that advance will be based on estimates and proposals, all that good stuff. And work will get started. And, you know, the project will be progressing, and you'll be getting invoices from the contractors, reviewing them, making payments, submitting them to ISK for review. ISK's review process can be very slow because they do not have a lot of staff looking at invoices and receipts. And I've been part of a recovery where in the first year and a half, we submitted almost 30,000 documents to ISK in forms of timesheets, invoices, receipts. For ISK to go through that takes a long time. So nation cash flow could slow down, which means instead of adhering to like a 15 or 30-day payment term, you could be getting into a 45, 60-day payment term. And your partners need to be aware of this risk. You can do a lot of things to mitigate it, and that's what we're going to go through, especially working with your finance department. But the finance department has to be a well-oiled machine. The whole department needs to be a well-oiled machine in terms of receivables and payables. And getting the documentation to ISK in a clear way where it's organized and they can look at it quickly and they know what an invoice is for and they know that it's already been approved in principle. So having meetings with partners to talk about the EMAP reimbursement process, super critical, because they need to be on board and they need to be ready as well. Because the last thing you want to be doing as a recovery lead is taking 5, 6, 7 phone calls a day from contractors that haven't been paid and it's overdue. It's the last thing you want. It's not good for anybody. They should not be put in a position to fund the recovery or bankroll the recovery. That is ISK's job. So again, if you've got the ability to bankroll this ahead of time, which is quite risky because you could be paying for things that ISK hasn't indicated is approved in principle, you could be spending money that you don't get back. And if you do that, chief and council need to know and they have to be prepared for that. It's okay if you want to do that. You can augment ISK's policy and spend more in other areas that they don't provide recovery funding for, but you don't want to get ahead of yourself spending too much. So partners, suppliers, whatever it is, please involve them in the planning from the beginning, because you're also likely going to need to identify partners you've never worked with before, maybe like restoration, maybe like contracted paramedic services, possibly animal welfare groups, other type of community development resources, new suppliers that you don't have a relationship with. So again, we know EM is about relationships. Start building your recovery relationships now, as well as your preparedness and response relationships too. Have those conversations. I cannot say it enough. If you can do a lot of this work, just what I've explained here, within, a 3-month time frame, and get to a governance agreement and educate your partners on the EMAP reimbursement process for response and recovery, you're going to solve a lot of your problems as you step into the actual planning phase. One partner I will put on the list here that you start early is restoration. And I know not a lot of First Nations can get insurance, especially home insurance. Some may have, insurance on some of the nation buildings. But if you're a very remote community and you've never had a restoration company come in to remediate a flooded home or school or whatever, especially a home, engage them now, because if you have a month-long evacuation, either from a flood or fire or whatever, and those homes are contaminated, if your members or homeowners have not been through the restoration process at the home level before, they're not going to understand it, because their priority will just be to get home. But you want them to get home to a safe and healthy home. So you need to start talking about restoration at the same time, because if you do have 10, 15, 20, 30 homes, maybe even up to 100 homes, 300 homes, depending on the size of your community, that need to be decontaminated and cleaned, you're going to need dozens and dozens to hundreds of restoration people and support. And they come in quick. They're very fast. They mobilize quick. It's good to develop those relationships and get them on board and pre-planning with them ahead of time. So this is where I'm going to leave this video, because that is a lot. It can take months. It's some of the pre-planning pieces to this. But if you can get through this process, you're also going to start to uncover questions and feedback from these groups, which are going to help you inform the plan later. as planning considerations, especially as we dive into the 7 capitals of recovery for Indigenous communities and First Nations, especially as we get into temporary accommodation, long-term temporary accommodation and housing. The process for that and mobilizing proper short-term temporary housing for communities outside of well site camps and shitty camps like that we don't want to put anybody in, and avoiding families being in hotels for years because that's not good for anyone else either. So stay tuned for the next tutorial. Watch for the resources coming out on this, and if you have any questions, please contact us anytime. Thank you.